Hello, I just wanted to introduce some of the maps or reintroduce some of the maps that I've done over the years. So this is a pretty big map compared to my hand, as you see. This is a hand-drawn map of the St. Lawrence lowlands. So you've got Ottawa, you got the Lake Ontario, Kingston, Brockville, and then you continue Johnstown, Cornwall right here, and then you go into Quebec. And you have Montreal, the island of Montreal right here. You have Lac Saint Louis, and then you go into Quebec right here. So you've got Ottawa on the Ottawa River going like here. You got the Champlain Lake and the Richelieu River, the Appalachian Mountains, the Adirondack Dome, Opeongo Highlands, and the Laurentian Hills. You can see a little bit of the Gatineau River right here. And Trois-Rivières, I forget the name of this river. I don't think that's the Saguenay. But yeah, this is a pretty big map, and I like it because elevation-wise, you can see the darker the blue, going to purple, the closer the level is to sea level. So right here to Quebec, you almost have zero. Yeah, you have 0 meters because you have high and low tides, and going into the St. Lawrence Gulf. And then here, right in this region around the Ottawa River, so most of this is about 40 meters elevation, and then 40 meters, which is Cobb Lake right here. And then most of this is 60, 70 meters. So this is all lowlands of the South Nation River, which I drew this map to highlight because all of this in blue would have been part of the Champlain Sea. And a little bit more up in the Laurentian Hills due to land depression because of the glaciers. So this is one of my favorite maps. I've also have a few here that I can show. This is a digital map that I've made. It's a composite. So it's hundreds of different elevation maps stuck together, relative elevation. So all in red here doesn't show the same elevation. It shows the high point relative to what's around it. So in red you have the highest points, and then in blue you have the lowest points compared to what's around. So this is more or less the same, a bigger zoomed in version of this region right here. And it's a much more precise version because it's not handmade, it's digital. So every image is actually elevation data that I took online and then stuck together, as you can see, the edges of every individual pictures. So this is hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and it's extremely detailed. And in purple, you can see the areas that would have been lakes. So you've got Cobb's Lake right here. You can see in purple. You can see, and the lakes that were also drained more upriver in between the Till on the Castor and South Nation River. You can see Mer Bleu really easily. You can see Alfred Bog really easily. You can see, I think it's not the Winchester Bog, but in that region there's also one bog that would have remained, but it would have been a lake in the before, but because there's a plantation now and a big forest, so now it's more wetlands. And all in blue and purple would have been wetlands, and in green, yellow, and red would have been woodland mixed in with wetlands. So you can see it would have been over 90% wetlands, which we are now at 15 and decreasing. And the rest of it would have been woodland, which is about the same amount of woodlands that we have now. But the problem is that the woodlands that we have now are decreasing extremely fast. So we're at about, I think, somewhere about 18% or a bit lower, maybe now at 15, closer to. And basically there's no river to speak of left in the summer months. In August and September, there's virtually no more water in this entire watershed, whereas everything in blue would have been standing water year-round before colonization, before killing all the beavers, before creating lumber with all the trees and creating farms, not to feed the people, but to send that grain back to the UK to feed the starving masses back home, where all the resources and the money is going. So you can really see the destruction of the environment. Here is another map. Now, this one hasn't been made by me. This one is from a master's thesis, which is a chemical characterization of groundwater in Eastern Ontario, which is a very long title by Laura Colgrove. It's online, it's accessible to anyone, and this basically shows you the bedrock, and over on top is the drift thickness. So you can see here, you can have up to 80 meters of clay, till, and sand on top of the bedrock. So in this region, you can see, so this is Limoges right here, which is over 80 meters of clay and sand. This is the La Rose Forest right here. You can see where the South Nation, where the area prone to landslide passes, and that's specifically because there's so much drift. So the river can carve a really long way before it hits rock, and that creates vertical walls that are extremely prone to erosion. And because of the nature of the clay, Gisletta clay creates landslides during times of flood, during times where areas that are deforested, and area prone to erosion, and which is the same here. So this is right underneath Curran. So in the area of Curran, Pendleton, and then going up to Wendover, but not all the way, Dickinson Creek right here. If you're from the area, you know it's about 80 meters of drift area, so you have a lot of wetlands and a lot of erosion that you can see happening whenever there's a lot of deforestation going on, which is going on. So you can see a lot of sand and a lot of clay being sent and dumped into the South Nation River, which is creating that muddy color that you see, which is not normal. It's because of the lack of vegetation, and because of the lack of beavers and water stops and water filtration. And so the water just takes all the clay and everything that it wants and just sends it downriver in man-made dams, which become sedimented and become useless and create even more flooding. So yeah, you can start seeing that with the bedrock and knowing where the drift, the clay is thickest. So this is the Mer Bleu bog area, and south of that the Vars area, and right up to Russell, which is its own little bit of a groundwater system where water pools. And these areas that you can see right here and here are areas that still have salt water from the Champlain Sea from 10,000 years ago. So the groundwater isn't fit for drinking, at least not until you have a lot of filtration in place, which isn't really cost effective. So in the area of Orleans, going south to Vars and Russell, and then from about Limoges to Alfred, Ontario, and up to Wendover and Clarence Creek, are areas where the groundwater will not be suitable or be very unfit for a large development or a large population of human beings, unless you have better management of the surface water, which is, like I said, virtually non-existent anymore. So that's another type of map that you can have of the same region. I want to show you some more. So here I'm not going to pass too much time because this one is pretty complicated. So these are fault lines. The type of bedrock and the lines on top are where the water flows in relation to the fault lines and in relation to the types of bedrock. So there you can see it's pretty complicated. It's pretty messy. But I'm just going to point out some effects. So this is the area where water from the Champlain Sea still exists because it has nowhere to go. Right here is the area, the Cobbs Lake. Cobbs Lake is right here, Cobbs Lake Creek. And then you have the area where nobody lives and nobody will ever live because it still floods. It's floodplains of the South Nation River. It used to be an open lake, Cobbs Lake. you have the Alfred bog right here, and you have Mer Bleue right here on top of this ground bedrock depression, right? Bedrock valley that harnesses its own water. That's, yeah, like I said, still have 10,000-year-old water. So you have the Gloucester Fault right here. You have the Rigaud-Russell Fault right here. And you can see where the water passes over the faults. And you can see that it, well, you can't probably see, but after analysis, you can see that it correlates. The fault lines, the geology, the drift all correlates together. To give you a picture of how water should be managed, of how it used to exist, and how you can best approach. So this is a map that I've made, I've recreated really, of an already existing map, which I can show you right here. So this is the types of clay, types of sand. In red, you can see the landslides in the area of Clarence Creek up to Wendover, and then down in Alfred and Ataka Bay, it's just massive landslides. So this is the map I based myself on, and the South Nation River watershed is like this, almost all clay, with a big exception of a bit of till in the highlands, a bit of till and sand, beach from the Champlain Sea, and then the sandy ridges created from the Ottawa Delta that used to pass like this. And then, of course, you have the Precambrian, the Canadian Shield on here, Canadian Shield here, and then you have the same Adirondack Dome here, so same type of rock as over here and over here. So this is the Ottawa embayment, and most of everything you see in here, except for the few bits of exposed bedrock, are all features that were deposited during or after the Ice Age. You've got the till in green, you've got the sandy beaches of the Champlain Sea in blue, you've got the yellow sand of the Ottawa Delta in yellow, and then you can see in blue is the clay from the Champlain Sea, and then a bit of gray here and there for what remains of the organic matter from the bogs and the wetlands. So yeah, you can correlate these with the fault lines, you can correlate these with the elevation and the current flow of water, and gives you a pretty good picture of how you should manage, and how also the watershed is currently being mismanaged. So here's another elevation map that I've made of the watershed, the St. Lawrence lowlands. Another hand-drawn map, which is, I think, a few years old. It's pretty old. Here's another one of the same, just a little bit more simple, to demonstrate more or less the same thing. So the Ottawa Valley and the South Nation Valley, and the St. Lawrence lowland on the other side. And then, of course, you start having some maps that I've made that are a little bit more complex, like these guys, that I've written a bit more about, that kind of show you the evolution from the Champlain Sea to the freshwater lake, which was Lake Lanxlis, and then from that to the watershed that we have now. So you can see here that would have been about 5,000 years ago, water would have been that level, at the blue level, right here. And then 5,000 to now, this would have been the wetlands that exist today, right? So this is an elevation map that I've made on the computer, so it's digital, but it's still something that I've made myself. Here's another interesting type of map. So in chronological order, you have all the settlements that were established in the region, and then these are all either loyalist settlements. So the first ones are loyalist. You have one that is a French seigneurie, a little bit older, L'Orignal, but it was not really inhabited. There was very few people, but there was a bit of French people, but it was mostly loyalist. And then you have the Scottish immigrants, and starting after the war between Canada and the US. And then in the 30s, when the Canada, Upper and Lower Canada were united, it switches to French people mostly. 1845, 1850, 1853, 1854. So those are the last villages that were established where wetlands used to be. But because all the highlands have been deforested the wetlands disappear. So now you can start cultivating the lowlands. So all the French people go to the lowlands, and those are the last towns that are established in the region, really. Um, it's Saint Pascal being the last one, being established on the side of a lake that now no longer exists. Here I wanted to show a bit. It's not all, not all the watershed. It's not the entire watershed, but it's a bit of it. But it's in lines that now more or less dictate the watershed's hydrology. So the water no longer follows elevation, really. Water follows these lines that are the roadways and the ditches along the roadways. So it's pretty arbitrary, as you can see. There's not really no following elevation. Um, there's very little logic to the hydrology that we established through our infrastructure, public infrastructure, because here we want to go from point A to point B, but we don't care whether that makes any sense or not. We just want to get there, right? So this infrastructure is established because we never stop to think, well, this really the best way to do things, which really isn't. So the watershed runs dry every year. There's floods. There's a lot of erosion, a lot of sedimentation, and development does not follow any sort of logic, environmental logic. So because of that, the environment suffers, and because the environment suffers, the quality of life of the people also goes down. Let's see if we have any other maps. I can show you an example of. So this is in a study of the Alfred Bog, so what's left of the Alfred Bog. And the lines here are the lines of sand and organic matter that were deposited every time there's a big flood. So the hydrology of Cobb's Lake pushes the water against the bog and the organic matter, creates these ridges of sand and organic matter, and which creates pools where beavers can manage and develop wetlands and peatlands. So every time, so this bog is over 7,000 years old. So you can see this is the first ridge that was created. And then you have a second ridge which almost disappeared, and then third ridge, and then it starts, the shape starts changing because of the amount of organic matter that now exists. So the water doesn't go all the way through, so there's a big line of organic matter that's now created, which almost still exists right here. It's all being excavated commercially, all here as well, which that's why it no longer exists. Because the bog would have been all the way over here and all the way over here as well. There's missing big pieces that were the federal government commercially extracted the peat to sell, and now private businesses do the same still, even as the provincial government is claiming that they want to thinking about changing it to a provincial park, which would make no sense because there's literally nothing. There's no infrastructure. There's one cement road that goes by the bog, and that's it. Station Road. The rest are all sand roads, and because the region floods, and because the region, and starting over here, has very few drifts because the bedrock valley is all over here, but the way the water escapes goes over here, and that's why you have Caledonia Springs over here. So you have this big lines of organic matter that are created after hundreds and hundreds of years of accumulation, and this is all being this is all disappearing because every waterways that used to connect the bog are no longer connecting. So this region here was cut off. So all this water escaping from the highland, Van Cleek Hill over here, that would have been flowing into the bog, and the Cobb's Lake that would have been, and the South Nation that would have been flowing into the bog as well from here, and then afterwards emptying into Actica Creek and Mill Creek going to Hawkesbury. So you no longer have anything connected to the bog except for rainwater or meltwater from the snow, creating an environment where peat is progressively dried up and being replaced by forests of firs and larch. Yeah, which I've witnessed year after years going to the bog over a decade. Um, yeah, so you can see here is a elevation map of the highlands that I've made. So you can see the Adirondack Dome, which is the highest elevation in the region, and then you have the Opeongo Highlands and most of Algonquin Park right here. You have Mont Tremblant and the Laurentian Hills over here, and then of course the Ottawa Valley and the St. Lawrence Lowerland, which the South Nation in between, snuck in between, kind of nondescript and not known, really. So here's another last map I'll show you. A massive map that I've made of the St. Lawrence lowlands right here, the St. Lawrence, going up, reaching up to Montreal, and then the Ottawa River with the Ottawa Delta that's now dried up, but with the South Nation lowlands. So comparing the two, seeing the elevation, which this is 40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters of elevation, very low above sea level. So I love this map. It's very big, but it shows you just how intriguing the wetlands would have been. So this would have been a lake. These guys right here would have been lakes. These would have been wetlands all the way to the Sand Ridge, the Marbleu Bog, leading to the Cobbs Lake, and then Alfred Bog. So open bodies of water and peat that no longer exist. And then the St. Lawrence, of course, was dammed for a shipping way to Toronto and the Great Lakes. And so this watershed also changed a lot. So here you can see the lake that was created artificially. Here as well, you can see a lake that was created from the dams right here, from the seaway. So a lot of alteration for the sake of money and not for the sake of the people that live there, and also for the sake of money from people that live somewhere else. Right? So this is arguably one of the poorest region in Ontario, and one of the closest regions to urban centers. So you have Ottawa, which is the national capital. You have Kingston right here in Lake Ontario, with Toronto not too far this way, and you have Montreal right here. So technically this region should be booming in terms of development, of a term of economy, but it's not the case because one, there's a border between Quebec and Ontario, and following the history of Canada, most of the political organization of Canada as it is creating a division between cultures and finding ways of claiming that you're for diversity at the same way trying to assimilate minorities, which is everyone except for English Protestant values and culture that kind of imbibe popular culture in both Canada and the United States, which is basically just industry, business, work all the time, which has more or less taken over the world and created all these problems that we see nowadays. So this is one of the poorest regions in Ontario, considered rural, even though some spots are developing, but because there's not really any resources to sustain that development is always going to be for the lower classes. Yeah, for the lower classes, that will always just depend on the cities, which is Ottawa and Montreal, closest to the region, for most of their economy and livelihood, and not on the resources. So right now, even though the watershed cannot sustain life as we know it, um, you can still have people living and developing in the region because resources come from somewhere else. Water, food, uh, shelter, everything comes from somewhere else. So because you're not actually depending on this environment can just become crap, and people don't realize it because they don't have to, right? So yeah, I think those are the maps that I want to show you, and I can go one by one. I think I could talk for an entire day for every single one of these maps because they represent different aspects of the watershed. Yeah, so there's so much you can learn about your direct environment without having recourse to internet, without having um, any need really for exterior entertainment or anything, because what's around you has infinite knowledge that you can actually put to practical use, whereas entertainment is basically made to waste time and resources in order to sustain a bigger population that have a lower quality of life. Um, yeah, so yeah, geology relates to socioeconomics. Social sciences and hard sciences are one and the same. They all relate to each other. Fault lines, geology, the kind of clay, till, sand, the kind of patterns of development for ecology, so for plants and animals following plants, and then the people following the animals following the plants, and then the social reasons that basically colonizations that exist when resources go missing and when resources are mismanaged. Um, and it's always the case that when people claim that we've transcended human nature, that when we need more than survival, it's because they don't know how to survive and they need to convince other people of their ideas so that they can work for them. So it's basically exploitation. So if you can't put into practice the knowledge that you have, if you can't know what your direct environment is, and if you can't rely on your direct environment to survive, then you're relying on exploitation. So this is why this knowledge become useful, so that you know how water works in the region and how water creates plants and animals, and then how these can sustain you within your range of awareness, right? Within the range that you can travel, within the range that you can be held accountable for your actions, because beyond that you can't be held accountable for your actions. On the internet you can't be held accountable, so there's no reason to communicate or have relationships with people who you can't hold accountable and who can't hold you accountable. The relationship that you have to have are proximity, which is family and neighbors, which is in this region if you live in this region, and the same applies for any region that you live, um, which is why it's good to know, right? It's good to know. And the way I know is by creating visual representation of my watershed, and that's how I visualize. That's how I create knowledge for myself, right? So I think it's a good way to share it as well. Let me know what you think.